I always thought we had the perfect marriage, the kind people envied from the outside looking in. James was handsome, successful, charming, the type of man who commanded attention when he walked into a room. I was the supportive wife who stood by his side at company dinners, who kept our beautiful suburban home spotless, who sacrificed my own ambitions because he convinced me that his career needed to come first. For 8 years I believed that was my purpose, to be the foundation upon which he built his empire. Until that rainy Tuesday afternoon when I heard him say the words that shattered everything. She's nothing. Worthless, really. Just someone to come home to. I wasn't meant to hear it. I'd come home early from my volunteer work at the community center, the little hobby James had suggested to keep me occupied. Our housekeeper had let me in without announcement, and I'd walked quietly through our spacious home, umbrella still dripping, planning to surprise him with lunch since he was working from home that day. His office door was partially open. Inside, James was pacing back and forth, wireless earbuds in, engaged in what appeared to be a heated conversation. I paused, not wanting to interrupt an important business call. "No, it's not like that with her." He laughed, a sound I recognized, the laugh he reserved for when he was trying to impress someone. "She has no idea. Why would she? She's completely dependent on me." My hand froze on the doorknob. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. "Look, Melanie, you don't need to worry about Eliza. She's nothing. Worthless, really. Just someone to come home to." The world tilted beneath my feet. Melanie, his new project manager? The one he'd mentioned with unusual frequency lately. 8 years and she still thinks I married her for love, he continued, his voice dropping to that conspiratorial tone I now realized I'd heard him use with clients right before closing a deal. Best investment I ever made. Her father's connections got me everything I needed to launch the company, and now that the old man's gone, she doesn't even question where the money goes. The lunch bag slipped from my fingers, the paper rustling softly against the hardwood floor. I should have picked it up, should have walked away, should have confronted him immediately. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was hearing. "No, baby, you're nothing like her. You're brilliant, ambitious. God, the way you handled the Robinson account was incredible. Eliza wouldn't even understand what you did." He laughed again, and this time it was like hearing a stranger. This man whose bed I'd shared for nearly a decade suddenly revealed as someone I didn't know at all. "Fine, I'll tell her I have another late meeting. Your place at 8? And wear that black thing from last time." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so violently I was certain he would hear it. Somehow I made it to our bedroom, before the tears came. With shaking hands, I locked the door and slid down against it until I hit the floor, my vision blurring as the full weight of his betrayal crashed over me. Worthless. The word echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of my skull, growing louder with each repetition. Worthless. Just someone to come home to. 8 years and she still thinks I married her for love. I pressed my fist against my mouth to stifle the sobs that threatened to escape. I couldn't let him hear me. For the first time in our marriage, I needed him to remain oblivious. Because in that moment, something inside me changed, something fundamental and irreversible. The devoted wife who had spent years molding herself to fit James's expectations began to dissolve, replaced by someone I didn't yet recognize. Someone who wouldn't cry forever. Someone who would make him regret those words. I stayed in our bedroom until I heard James's car pull out of the driveway at 7:30 that evening. He'd knocked on the door around 5, calling that he had an emergency meeting and wouldn't be home for dinner. I'd called back that I had a migraine and would be sleeping it off. He didn't push to come in, didn't offer to bring me medicine or water, just said, "Feel better," with the exact right note of concern in his voice before walking away. Such a perfect performance. Had it always been a performance? When I was certain he was gone, I unlocked the door and moved through our house like a ghost. Everything looked different now. The expensive furniture we'd picked out together. Had he simply been indulging me? The photographs of us displayed on the walls. Was he grimacing rather than smiling in them? The walk-in closet filled with designer clothes he'd encouraged me to buy. Just part of maintaining the perfect trophy wife image? I found myself in his office, standing before his desk. The sleek computer was password protected, but I knew the password. I'd always known it. His mother's birthday followed by his college football jersey number. He'd never bothered to hide it from me. Why would he? I was just the simple wife who wouldn't understand his business anyway. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Did I really want to know? Could I bear to discover more evidence of his betrayal? What if he had been cheating for years? What if Melanie wasn't the first? What if... I stepped back, my reflection in the dark monitor pale and haunted. I wouldn't go down that rabbit hole tonight. Not yet. First, I needed to understand my situation fully. In our early years together, when James was just starting his financial consulting firm, I'd handled some of the bookkeeping before he'd hired a real accountant. Because this is getting too complicated for you, sweetheart. I knew the basics of our finances, or thought I did. James managed everything now. I had access to a household account that he deposited money into monthly and a personal credit card with a generous limit. I'd never questioned it, never needed to. Now I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I returned to our bedroom and opened my laptop. First, I checked our joint account, the one I used for household expenses. The balance was healthy, as always. Then I logged into the investment portfolio James had set up for me years ago. Just a little something to keep you secure, he'd said. I hadn't looked at it in ages. The numbers on the screen made my breath catch. It had grown significantly, worth nearly $800,000 now. For a moment, relief washed over me. At least he'd provided for me financially. But then his words echoed again. She's completely dependent on me. This wasn't generosity. This was control. And compared to what I suspected his own accounts contained, it was probably pocket change. I needed to know more, but I would have to be careful. If James suspected I knew anything, I'd lose whatever advantage my knowledge gave me. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, my mind racing. My father had been a successful business owner before his death 3 years ago. James had been instrumental in helping settle his estate, telling me not to worry my pretty head about the complicated details. I'd been so grief-stricken I'd let him handle everything. Had he manipulated my inheritance? Used my father's connections and then hidden the proceeds from me? The more I thought about it, the more patterns emerged. How James discouraged me from pursuing a career after we married. How he subtly undermined my confidence whenever I showed interest in learning about finance or business. How he praised me for the qualities that served him, my social skills, my ability to entertain his clients, my decorative presence, while dismissing my intelligence. For 8 years, I'd believed him when he said I wasn't cut out for the corporate world, that my talents lay elsewhere. That I was lucky to have him taking care of everything. I pressed my palms against my eyes until stars burst behind my eyelids. How could I have been so blind? So naive? You're not worthless, I whispered to myself in the darkness. And you're going to prove it. James returned home just after midnight. I pretended to be asleep, keeping my breathing deep and even as he moved around the bedroom. He didn't try to wake me. Didn't slide into bed and pull me against him as he once might have. Instead, he took a shower, washing away the evidence I thought bitterly, and then settled on his side of the bed, maintaining a careful distance between us. I lay awake long after his breathing turned steady, staring at the ceiling and piecing together a plan. First, I needed information, all the financial information I could gather without alerting James. Second, I needed to understand what skills I actually possessed that could translate into independence. And third, I needed to decide how far I was willing to go. Because the truth was, divorce would be the sensible option. I could hire a good lawyer, fight for my fair share, and walk away. But something deeper and darker had awakened in me. The humiliation of realizing my entire marriage had been a business arrangement, that the man I loved saw me as a worthless accessory, burned too deeply for such a civilized response. No, I didn't just want out. I wanted justice. I wanted to show James exactly how wrong he'd been about me. I wanted revenge. The thought should have frightened me. The good, kind woman I'd always believed myself to be would never contemplate revenge. But perhaps that woman had been just another illusion, a role I'd played to please a man who never deserved it. Morning arrived with no answers, but a clear sense of purpose. I rose before James, prepared his favorite breakfast, and kissed his cheek when he came downstairs, dressed in one of his expensive suits. "Feeling better?" he asked, barely glancing up from his phone. "Much better," I replied with a bright smile. "Sometimes you just need a good night's sleep." He nodded absently, scrolling through emails. "I'll be late again tonight. Don't wait up." Another meeting with Melanie about the Robinson account? I kept my tone casual, buttering a piece of toast I had no intention of eating. His fingers stilled on the phone screen for just a fraction of a second. So brief I would have missed it if I hadn't been watching for it. Then he looked up, his expression perfectly composed. "Among others." "Why do you ask?" I shrugged, maintaining my smile. "No reason. You've just mentioned her a few times lately. Sounds like she's doing great work." "She is," he said, studying my face for a moment before returning to his phone. "She has a real head for business. Natural talent." "That's wonderful," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. "It's important to have the right people on your team." He glanced at me again, perhaps searching for signs of suspicion, but I'd had years of practice presenting exactly the face James wanted to see. After a moment, he relaxed. "True. Not everyone is cut out for the business world." He stood, gathering his things. "I've got to run. Big day." I walked him to the door as I did every morning, accepting his perfunctory kiss. "Have a wonderful day, darling." "Good luck with your meetings." As his car disappeared down the driveway, I let the smile fall from my face. If he thought I was oblivious, that gave me time, and I intended to use every second of it. My first stop was our bank. I'd called ahead and scheduled an appointment with the manager, Marcus Daniels, who had handled our accounts since James founded his company. I dressed carefully, not too formal to raise questions, but polished enough to be taken seriously. A silk blouse, tailored pants, subtle makeup, the kind of outfit I wore to charity luncheons. "Mrs. Carter." Marcus greeted me warmly as his assistant showed me into his office. "What a lovely surprise. We don't often see you here." "James usually handles everything," I said with a self-deprecating laugh I'd perfected over the years. "But I'm trying to educate myself a bit more about our finances. James's business is growing so quickly, and I feel I should understand more." Marcus smiled indulgently. "That's admirable. What can I help you with today?" I leaned forward slightly, projecting earnest interest. "I'd like to review our accounts, just to get a better picture of our financial situation. James explained it all years ago, but you know how it is. In one ear and out the other." I hated myself for playing this role, the ditzy wife, but it was a character Marcus would find unthreatening, and it worked. His posture relaxed, and he chuckled. "Of course. Let me pull up your accounts." He turned his monitor so we could both see it, and began showing me the various accounts under our names. As I'd suspected, there was much more than I'd been aware of. Multiple investment accounts, property holdings, the business accounts for James's firm, all carefully organized. "And these are all joint accounts?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Marcus hesitated. "Well, no. Most of these are in Mr. Carter's name alone or under the business entity. Your joint accounts are these three here." He pointed to the screen, indicating the accounts I already knew about, the household account, our modest joint savings, and my investment portfolio. "I see," I said, letting a small frown crease my forehead. "And what about my father's estate?" After he passed, James said he transferred those assets to secure accounts for our future. Marcus looked uncomfortable. "I don't see anything specifically marked as inherited funds, Mrs. Carter. But your husband manages multiple business entities and investments. It's possible those assets were incorporated into various holdings. In other words, James had taken my inheritance and buried it so deeply within his financial maze that even the bank manager couldn't identify it anymore. I felt a fresh wave of anger but kept my expression pleasantly confused. "Oh, I'm sure you're right. James is so clever with these things." I paused. "Marcus, I'd like to get copies of the statements for all of our accounts, just so I can study them at home and better understand our situation. Would that be possible?" He hesitated again. "The joint accounts, certainly. For Mr. Carter's personal accounts or the business accounts, we would need his authorization." I widened my eyes. "Really? Even though I'm his wife?" "I'm afraid so. Banking regulations are quite strict about account access." I nodded, feigning disappointment while mentally filing away this information. "I understand. Well, I'll take whatever you can give me today, and perhaps speak with James about getting access to the rest." By the time I left the bank an hour later, I had a folder of statements for our joint accounts and a much clearer picture of my situation. James had structured our finances to keep me dependent and in the dark. The generous allowance he provided covered household expenses and my personal spending, but represented a tiny fraction of his true wealth. And there was something else. Something I'd noticed while reviewing the household account statements. Regular transfers of $5,000 each month to an account I didn't recognize. For the past 7 months. The timing aligned perfectly with when Melanie had joined his company. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The apartment, the black thing, she wore for him. He was funding their affair with money from our household account, the one account he knew I could see. He wasn't even trying to hide it, because he thought I was too stupid to notice or question it. My phone buzzed with a text from James, "Working late again. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, a cold clarity washing over me. I had been living a lie, and it was time to rewrite the story. Over the next week, I gathered information methodically while maintaining the facade of the oblivious wife. James was working late most nights, with Melanie, I presumed, which gave me time to conduct my investigation. I started with public records. James's company, Carter Financial Strategies, had grown substantially over the past 5 years. The business news articles I found online praised his innovative approach and rapid expansion. Several mentioned the fortuitous connections that had helped him secure his initial major clients, connections that had come through my father. Next, I researched our assets. Our home was valued at $2.3 million, held in James's name alone. His company had purchased a vacation property in Aspen 2 years ago, a business retreat. He'd taken me to exactly once. There were 3 investment properties in the city that I'd never even heard of. Everything was structured to keep control firmly in James's hands. If we divorced, I'd have to fight for every penny beyond my personal accounts, and given his resources, he could drag out legal proceedings until I was financially drained. But there was one thing James had never bothered to change: my status as a signatory on the business account my father had helped him set up when we first married. It was the seed account from which Carter Financial Strategies had grown, and according to the bank records I managed to access online using a password James had used for years, it now contained just over $2.8 million. My father had insisted I be a signatory just in case, and James had agreed, likely assuming I'd never check or question anything. The account had rarely been used in recent years, serving primarily as a reservoir for overflow profits. James probably thought of it as his emergency fund. It was about to become mine. But I couldn't just take the money and run. That would be too simple, too clean. No. I needed to use it to prove James wrong in the most fundamental way, to show him I wasn't worthless, that I could succeed where he never expected me to. The idea came to me gradually, pieced together from fragments of my past. Before meeting James, I'd been studying business with a focus on sustainable fashion. I'd interned at several small design houses and shown genuine talent for identifying emerging trends. James had encouraged me to drop out after our engagement, insisting I didn't need a career with him as my husband. Fashion had remained a passion, though. I kept up with industry news, followed designers obsessively, and had an extensive network of contacts from my charity work, many of them women in the industry who had always told me I had an eye. What if I started my own business? Used James's money that should have been partly mine anyway, to launch the sustainable fashion brand I'd once dreamed of? The ultimate irony, the woman he called worthless using his money to build something successful. The more I thought about it, the more the idea crystallized. I would need to move carefully, plan meticulously, and I would need help from someone who understood both business and the law. I found her through a women's networking event I attended under the pretense of supporting one of James's clients. Rebecca Zhang was a former corporate attorney who now specialized in helping women entrepreneurs structure their businesses. Her presentation on financial independence through entrepreneurship spoke directly to my situation without her knowing it. After her talk, I approached her, maintaining my role as the charming, slightly naive wife of James Carter. "Your presentation was fascinating," I told her. "I've always been interested in fashion, and I've been toying with the idea of starting something small." Rebecca studied me with intelligent eyes. "Small businesses have a way of growing when they're built on passion. What area of fashion interests you?" "Sustainable luxury," I said without hesitation. "There's a gap in the market for ethically produced pieces that don't sacrifice quality or design." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "You've thought about this." "For years," I admitted. "But I've never had the courage to actually do anything about it." "And what does your husband think of your idea?" The question was perfectly innocent, but something in her tone made me wonder if she'd picked up on more than I intended to reveal. I chose my words carefully. "He doesn't know yet. I'd like to have a solid plan before presenting it to him. He's very practical." Rebecca gave me a knowing look. "Men often are. Why don't we meet for coffee next week? I'd be happy to give you some initial guidance." We exchanged information, and as I drove home, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. Not just for escape from my sham marriage, but for a future I was building on my own terms. The coffee shop Rebecca suggested was in a neighborhood far from James's office or our social circle, a detail I appreciated. I arrived early, dressed more casually than usual in jeans and a simple blouse, my wedding ring conspicuously absent. If Rebecca noticed, she didn't comment. "So," she said after we'd ordered, "tell me more about this sustainable fashion brand you're envisioning." I hesitated, suddenly uncertain how much to reveal. Rebecca must have sensed my reluctance because she leaned forward, her expression softening. "Eliza, I work with women in all sorts of situations. Whatever you tell me stays between us." "Attorney-client privilege. Are you my attorney?" I asked. "I could be," she replied simply. "Sometimes women need legal advice that extends beyond business formation." There was something in her steady gaze that made me trust her, so I told her, not everything, but enough. About my background in fashion design, my father's death, James's control of our finances, my discovery of his affair. I left out my plan for revenge, positioning it instead as a desire for independence. Rebecca listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What you're describing is financial abuse," she said finally. "It's more common than you might think, especially in high-net-worth marriages." "I didn't see it," I admitted. "Not until recently." "Few do," she assured me. "Now about this business idea, it's actually quite viable. The sustainable luxury market is growing rapidly, but starting a fashion brand requires significant capital." I met her gaze steadily. "I have access to capital. James set up a business account years ago with my father's help. I'm still a signatory." Rebecca's expression remained neutral, but I could see her mind working. "How much are we talking about?" "Approximately $2.8 million. She didn't flinch at the number. "And legally, what's your claim to those funds?" "The account was established with my father's investment connections. James has treated it as his own, but I was made a signatory specifically to ensure I had access." Rebecca nodded slowly. "There's a case to be made that those funds represent, at least partially, your inheritance or marital assets. However," she continued, holding up a hand, "removing them without notice could be legally problematic." "I'm not planning to empty the account," I clarified, "just to use a portion, enough to start the business properly. 1 million, perhaps." "Even so," Rebecca said, "we need to structure this carefully. If you take the money and your husband challenges it, you could face serious consequences." She pulled out a notepad and began writing. "Here's what I suggest. First, we form an LLC for your fashion brand, using a name that wouldn't immediately connect to you. Second, we create a proper business plan and documentation to show this is a legitimate enterprise, not just a way to siphon funds. Third, we transfer the funds as a business investment, with proper paperwork showing your authority to make such an investment. And if James discovers it, the goal is to establish that you had legal authority to direct those funds toward a legitimate business opportunity. We'll document everything meticulously." She paused. "That said, once you take this step, you should be prepared for the possibility that your marriage will end. Are you ready for that?" The question hung between us. Was I ready? The wife I had been for 8 years would have been terrified at the prospect. But that woman was fading more each day, replaced by someone stronger, angrier, more determined. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm ready," Rebecca nodded, seemingly satisfied with my resolve. "Then let's get started. I'll draft the necessary formation documents for your company. Have you thought of a name?" I had, actually. It had come to me the night before as I lay awake listening to James's steady breathing beside me, plotting my escape from his world. "Phoenix Rising," I said, "because something new and beautiful can emerge from the ashes of what's been destroyed." Rebecca smiled. "Perfect. One last question. Does your husband monitor your personal accounts? Will he notice if you start paying for business expenses?" I shook my head. "He deposits my allowance and doesn't track how I spend it as long as I don't exceed it. He thinks I waste it all on clothes and lunch with friends." "Good. Use those accounts for any preliminary expenses. Keep everything documented, but don't do anything unusual with the business account until we have all the legal structures in place." As we parted ways, Rebecca handed me her card with her private number written on the back. "Call me anytime. And Eliza, you're making the right decision. No one deserves to be made to feel worthless." Her words stayed with me as I drove home, a plan taking shape with each passing mile. James had underestimated me for years. He'd dismissed my intelligence, my ambition, my worth. Soon, he would realize just how badly he had misjudged the woman he married. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved carefully. During the day, I maintained my routine: charity committee meetings, yoga classes, lunch with the wives of James's business associates. I kept my smile bright, my conversation light, my demeanor unchanged. If anyone noticed the new energy humming beneath my surface, they didn't mention it. At night, after James left for his meetings, with Melanie, I worked on my business plan. The foundation came easily. I'd been mentally designing this brand for years without realizing it. Phoenix Rising would focus on luxurious, ethically produced women's clothing that empowered rather than objectified. Pieces that made women feel confident, comfortable, and valued. I reached out to former contacts from my fashion school days, presenting my idea as a someday dream, gathering information and advice. Many expressed genuine enthusiasm, offering connections and suggestions. I cataloged everything meticulously, building a network I could activate when the time came. Rebecca filed the LLC formation documents, using a registered agent service to maintain my privacy. Phoenix Rising now existed on paper, with me as its sole owner. She also prepared the investment documentation, ready for when I decided to make my move. "The longer you can maintain normalcy, the better," she advised during one of our secure phone calls. "Gather everything you'll need after. Personal documents, sentimental items, anything that would be difficult to replace." I began collecting these things slowly, storing them in a safety deposit box Rebecca helped me secure. Birth certificate, passport, photos of my parents, the jewelry my mother had left me, items James would have no reason to notice were missing. I also began researching commercial spaces in the city's emerging design district. There was a beautiful converted warehouse available, open floor plan, abundant natural light, character and history in its exposed brick walls. The perfect home for Phoenix Rising when the time came. All while playing the role of the devoted, oblivious wife. James noticed nothing. He came home late most nights, distracted and increasingly careless. Twice he called me by the wrong name when half asleep. Once I found a receipt for a woman's bracelet in his jacket pocket, an item I never received. His arrogance made him sloppy. He was so confident in my dependence that it never occurred to him I might be planning my escape. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. James announced he needed to go to Chicago for a week to handle an important client situation. "Melanie and I will fly out Sunday evening," he said over dinner, not even bothering to disguise her involvement. "There are some complicated portfolio issues we need to address in person." "Sounds important," I replied, taking a sip of wine to hide my expression. "I'll miss you, of course, but I understand." He looked almost disappointed by my easy acceptance. Perhaps he'd expected me to beg to come along, giving him the pleasure of refusing me. Instead, I smiled and asked if he needed help packing. "You're being very understanding," he said, studying me with mild suspicion. I reached across the table and took his hand, channeling the woman he thought I was. "Your work is important, James. I know that. I'm proud of what you've built." The irony of my words must have escaped him, because he relaxed, pleased by my supportive response. "I've been working so much lately. When I get back, we should plan a weekend away. Just the two of us." "That would be lovely," I lied, squeezing his hand before releasing it. Inside, I was calculating. A week without James. 7 days to set everything in motion. It was time. I stood in the driveway Sunday evening, waving as James's car pulled away. He was meeting Melanie at the airport. A week of business by day and pleasure by night, all on the company expense account, all while his worthless wife waited patiently at home. I gave the car a final wave as it disappeared around the corner, then let my hand drop, the smile sliding from my face. I turned and walked back into the house, the beautiful prison where I'd wasted 8 years of my life, and headed straight to the home office. I sat at James's desk and opened his computer. The password hadn't changed. His ego would never allow him to imagine I'd snoop through his things. Within minutes, I was scrolling through his emails, financial statements, calendar. There it all was. The evidence of his affair with Melanie going back nearly a year. Dinner reservations, hotel bookings, jewelry purchases. The apartment he'd leased for their rendezvous. I downloaded everything to a secure drive, then turned to the financial records. James had been systematically moving assets, consolidating his control over everything he owned. There was a new offshore account I hadn't known about. Property transfers. A revised will that left me a pittance compared to his true worth. He'd been planning too. Perhaps not to leave me yet, but to ensure that when he did, I would walk away with as little as possible. I picked up my phone and called Rebecca. "It's time," I said when she answered. "James is away for the week. I need to move now." "Are you at home?" she asked, professional as always. "Yes, stay there." I'm sending a courier with documents for you to sign. Once that's done, we can initiate the transfer." 2 hours later, I sat at the dining room table, signing the papers that would change everything. Articles of organization for Phoenix Rising LLC. Investment documentation authorizing the transfer of $1.2 million from the business account to the new company. A lease agreement for the warehouse space I'd selected. "Are you certain about the amount?" Rebecca had asked when we finalized the plan. "It's a significant portion of the account." "I'm certain," I'd replied. "It's what I'll need to do this properly. And it's less than half. He can't claim I tried to take everything." Now, watching the courier depart with the signed documents, I felt strangely calm. There was no turning back. By morning, the money would be transferred. By tomorrow afternoon, I would have the keys to my new business space. By the time James returned from Chicago, Phoenix Rising would be more than just a paper entity. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom and began packing. Not everything. That would alert the housekeeper that something was wrong. Just enough to get me through the coming weeks. Clothes suitable for a business owner, not a trophy wife. Comfortable shoes. The few pieces of jewelry that had been gifts from my parents, not from James. Tomorrow, I would move into the small apartment Rebecca had helped me secure, a temporary space until I found something permanent. The lease was in the business's name, untraceable to me personally. James would not be able to find me unless I wanted to be found. As I folded sweaters and selected shoes, my phone buzzed with a text from James. "Arrived safely. Missing you already. Sleep well." I stared at the message, wondering if he'd sent something similar to Melanie before or after. Wondering if he was already in her bed while sending me platitudes. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I really prepared to blow up my entire life? To walk away from the security I'd known for 8 years? Then I remembered his voice, cold and dismissive. "She's nothing. Worthless, really." I typed back, "Glad you arrived safely. Miss you too. Good luck with your meetings." One last performance as the devoted wife. One last lie to match the thousands he'd told me. In the morning, everything would change. I slept fitfully that night, alone in our king-sized bed. Dawn was just breaking when my phone chimed with an email notification. The bank, confirming a transfer of $1.2 million from the business account to Phoenix Rising, LLC. It was done. Moving methodically, I showered and dressed in clothes James had never seen. A simple black blazer over a white silk shirt, tailored jeans, ankle boots. Professional but comfortable. The uniform of my new life. I left a note for our housekeeper explaining I was visiting my college roommate for a few days. A story that would buy me time if James called home before I was ready for him to know I'd gone. Then I loaded my suitcases into my car and took one last look at the house. It was beautiful, undeniably. A showcase home in an exclusive neighborhood. But it had never really been mine. I felt nothing as I pulled out of the driveway, no twinge of sadness or nostalgia, only a growing sense of freedom. My first stop was the bank, where I withdrew $10,000 in cash from my personal account, money James would consider rightfully mine, so there could be no accusation of theft. Next, I drove to the warehouse space and met with the leasing agent to sign the final paperwork and collect the keys. Standing in the empty space afterward, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, I felt a surge of exhilaration. The exposed brick walls, the concrete floors, the industrial ceiling, all a blank canvas waiting for my vision to fill it. I walked the perimeter slowly, ideas flowing faster than I could catalog them. Space for design, for production, for a small retail showroom, room to grow. My phone rang. "Rebecca, the money transferred successfully," she said without preamble. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," I admitted. "Excited. Slightly nauseous." She chuckled. "All appropriate responses. Where are you now?" "At the warehouse." "It's perfect, Rebecca. I can see everything so clearly." "Good. Remember, we need to move quickly to establish legitimate business operations. The contractor will meet you there at noon to discuss the renovations. I've also scheduled meetings with potential suppliers and a headhunter who specializes in fashion industry talent." Rebecca had laid the groundwork meticulously, lining up resources I would need to transform Phoenix Rising from concept to reality in record time. The goal was to have visible, documented business activity well underway before James discovered what I'd done. "What about living arrangements?" she asked. "I'm heading to the apartment after this. It's furnished, so I'll have everything I need for now." "Good. I've prepared a file with all the documentation of James's financial control and infidelity, should you need leverage. It's at my office whenever you're ready. After we disconnected, I stood in the center of the empty warehouse and turned slowly, taking it all in. This was really happening. I was really doing this. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Negotiations going well. Taking clients to dinner tonight. How are things at home? I stared at the message, debating how to respond. I couldn't tip my hand yet, but each lie felt more bitter than the last. All fine here, I replied finally, thinking of visiting Sarah for a few days. Sarah was my college roommate who lived in Boston, far enough away that James wouldn't expect to reach me easily. Good idea, came his swift response. You've seemed restless lately. A change of scenery might do you good. Restless. The word struck me as absurdly inadequate. I had been dying inside, suffocating under the weight of his expectations and limitations. But he'd seen only restlessness, a minor inconvenience in his perfectly arranged life. I put the phone away without responding and got back to work. There was so much to do, and for the first time in years, every task had purpose. Every decision was mine. Every step moved me further from the woman James had deemed worthless. By evening, I had met with the contractor and approved plans for the renovations, interviewed a potential assistant, and connected with 3 sustainable fabric suppliers. My new apartment was small but modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a vibrant neighborhood far from the manicured suburbia James preferred. I ordered takeout and ate at the breakfast bar, surrounded by sketches and notes. Design ideas had been flooding in all day, silhouettes, fabrics, a cohesive aesthetic that would define Phoenix Rising. I worked until my eyes burned, until the concepts blurred on the page. When I finally fell into bed, exhaustion hit like a physical weight. But it was different from the empty fatigue that had plagued me in my life with James. This was the satisfying tiredness of purpose, of forward motion, of rebirth. The next 5 days passed in a blur of activity. The renovations on the warehouse began, transforming the raw space into a functioning atelier with remarkable speed. What money and Rebecca's connections could accomplish never ceased to amaze me. I hired a small, passionate team, 2 experienced pattern makers, a production manager who specialized in ethical manufacturing, and a brilliant young designer whose sustainable approach aligned perfectly with my vision. We worked around the clock, fueled by excitement and the urgency of our timeline. By Thursday, the design studio was taking shape, equipment arriving, fabric samples covering the tables. We had developed 5 core pieces for our first collection, the foundation upon which we would build. I was in a meeting with potential investors, friends of Rebecca's who specialized in women-owned businesses, when my phone began buzzing repeatedly. James. I silenced it and continued the presentation, outlining Phoenix Rising's business model and growth projections. The investors were impressed, committing funds on the spot to supplement what I'd already invested, additional capital that would accelerate our launch. When I checked my phone afterward, there were 7 missed calls from James and a series of increasingly agitated texts. Where are you? Sarah says you're not in Boston. The bank just called about an unusual transfer. What the hell is going on? Eliza, answer your damn phone. Now. So he knew, sooner than I'd expected, but not before we'd established operations. I took a deep breath and called Rebecca. James knows, I said when she answered. At least about the money. Are you somewhere safe? Her voice was calm, steadying. At the warehouse. With my team. Good. Stay there. I'll come to you. It's time for the next phase. While waiting for Rebecca, I gathered my team and explained the situation. Not everything, but enough. That Phoenix Rising was born from my need to escape a controlling marriage. That my husband might attempt to interfere with our work. That they might need to operate without me briefly if legal issues arose. They were universally supportive, their commitment unwavering. It struck me then how different these relationships were from what I'd known with James, built on respect, shared passion, and honesty. Rebecca arrived with her paralegal, carrying files and a determined expression. James called the bank and discovered the transfer. She confirmed. He's threatening legal action to reverse it and freeze all your assets. We need to move now. We settled in the conference room, another expedited renovation, and she laid out the plan. I've prepared divorce papers citing emotional abuse, financial control, and infidelity. We have documentation for all 3. We'll file today and request an emergency hearing for temporary financial orders that will prevent him from cutting off your access to marital funds. What about the business transfer? I asked. We've documented everything meticulously. Your role in the original funding of his company through your father's connections, your status as a legal signatory on the account, the legitimate business purpose of the investment. It's defensible, especially alongside evidence of his misappropriation of your inheritance. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. What do you need from me? First, this restraining order application. She slid a document across the table. Given his controlling behavior and the likelihood of rage when he discovers what you've done, we should establish legal protection immediately. I signed without hesitation, remembering the cold fury in James's eyes during rare moments when his mask slipped. He'd never been physically violent, but this was a betrayal beyond anything I'd ever dared before. Second, we need to address his inevitable countermoves. He'll try to paint you as unstable, as stealing company funds, as abandoning the marriage without cause. We need your statement detailing the history of his behavior. For the next hour, I spoke into a recorder, laying out the progression of my marriage, the initial love and hope, the gradual erosion of my independence, the subtle undermining of my confidence, the isolation from friends and family who might have recognized what was happening, the discovery of his affair and his cruel assessment of my worth. Throughout it all, Rebecca listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions to draw out details I might have overlooked. When I finished, she stopped the recording and reached across the table to squeeze my hand briefly. You're doing the right thing, Eliza. What he did, it's textbook emotional abuse. My phone began ringing again. James. This time, Rebecca nodded for me to answer, putting it on speaker. Hello, James, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Where the fuck are you? He hissed, his refined facade completely gone. And what the hell do you think you're doing with my money? I'm building a business, I replied calmly. With an investment from funds I had legal access to. Legal access, he sputtered. That's company money. Money your father helped me secure, yes, but it belongs to Carter Financial Strategies. You had no right. I had every right, I interrupted. I'm a legal signatory on that account, and I've invested less than half of the balance in a legitimate business opportunity. You stupid bitch, he spat, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. You think you can just take my money and walk away? You're nothing without me. Nothing. You can't run a business. You can barely manage a household budget. Rebecca made a slashing motion across her throat. Enough evidence. Actually, James, I'm already running it. Quite successfully. Something you'd know if you'd ever bothered to see me as more than decorative. This is insane, he said. You're having some kind of breakdown. I'm coming home right now. We're going to fix this. Don't, I said firmly. I'm not at the house. And by the time you return, you'll be served with divorce papers and a restraining order. A long silence. Then, in a voice frighteningly controlled, You really have no idea who you're dealing with, do you? I will destroy you, Eliza. When I'm done, you'll have nothing. Not the house, not your precious new business, not a fucking penny. You'll be begging me to take you back. Perhaps, I acknowledged, surprising myself with my continued calm. But at least I'll know my own worth. I ended the call as he began another tirade. Rebecca was already on her phone, instructing her office to expedite filing the divorce papers and restraining order. Well, she said when she hung up, he's shown his true colors. That recording will be extremely useful in court. I nodded, a strange mixture of emotions washing through me. Fear, certainly. James was powerful, connected, and now enraged. But also relief. The pretense was over. The mask was off. And underneath the fear and relief was something else, something I hadn't fully allowed myself to feel until now. Pride. Pride in what I was building. Pride in finding the courage to walk away. Pride in reclaiming my worth. What now? I asked. Rebecca gathered her papers, her expression determined. Now we fight. And we make Phoenix Rising so undeniably successful that his accusations about your business acumen become laughable. I looked around at the space taking shape around us, my vision becoming reality, and for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely alive. I can do that, I said. The storm broke with predictable fury. Within 24 hours of our phone call, James had returned from Chicago, discovered I wasn't at the house, and begun a systematic campaign to regain control. First came the financial assault. He attempted to freeze all our accounts, succeeding with some, but thwarted by Rebecca's preemptive legal maneuvers with others. He contacted every business associate, supplier, and potential investor he could identify, spreading concerns about my mental stability and business competence. Then came the personal attacks. calls and texts alternating between rage, manipulation, and occasional moments of apparent remorse. He contacted our friends, his friends really, painting himself as the concerned husband blindsided by his wife's irrational behavior. He even called my mother in Arizona, spinning a tale of worry that I was having some kind of breakdown. Through it all, I remained focused on Phoenix Rising. The warehouse transformation continued at breakneck speed. Our core collection expanded from 5 pieces to 15. We scheduled a small, exclusive launch event for 3 weeks out, just enough time to produce a limited run of each design. James discovered the warehouse location on day 6, presumably by hiring someone to follow one of my employees. He appeared unannounced, striding in as if he owned the place, suit impeccable, smile charming for anyone watching. "Impressive," he said, looking around at the bustling atelier. "You've been busy with my money." I stood my ground, conscious of my team watching. The investment capital for Phoenix Rising came from an account I had legal access to, representing partial value of my contribution to your business success through my father's connections. He laughed, but his eyes were cold. "Is that what your lawyer told you to say?" "Very rehearsed, Eliza. Please leave, James. The restraining order prohibits you from coming within 100 feet of me or my business premises." "Our business premises," he corrected. "Since you used my money to finance this little project." He gestured dismissively at the space around us. "Though I have to admit, it's adorable that you think you can make this work." I felt rather than saw my team closing ranks around me. Madeline, my production manager, stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, I've called security. They'll be here momentarily to escort you out." James's smile faltered slightly. He hadn't expected resistance from others, only from me. His eyes narrowed as he looked around, truly seeing for the first time the scale of what I was building, the equipment, the materials, the professional team. "This is a waste of time and money," he said, his voice hardening. "Sustainable fashion? Please. It's a passing trend at best, and you're years too late to capitalize on it." I recognized the tactic, undermining my confidence, making me question myself. It had worked for years. It wouldn't work now. "I guess we'll find out," I replied calmly. "Now please leave before security arrives. I'd hate for there to be a scene." Something flashed in his eyes, surprise perhaps at my refusal to crumble. Then the security guards appeared, and he had no choice but to depart, though not without a parting shot. "This isn't over, Eliza. Not by a long shot." I watched him leave, his back rigid with fury, and realized I felt nothing. No fear, no doubt, no lingering attachment. He had no power over me anymore. The legal battle intensified over the next 2 weeks. James's attorneys filed motions to freeze all business assets pending resolution of the divorce. Rebecca countered with evidence of his financial manipulation and infidelity. The court scheduled hearings, established temporary orders ensuring I had living expenses, and, crucially, allowed Phoenix Rising to continue operations while the financial disputes were resolved. In the midst of the legal chaos, something unexpected happened. The fashion community began to talk about Phoenix Rising. A well-respected sustainability blogger got wind of our story, woman leaves controlling husband to start ethical fashion brand, and requested an interview. With Rebecca's careful guidance about what I could and couldn't say pending litigation, I agreed. The resulting article went viral within industry circles. Suddenly, our launch event, planned as a small introduction, had a waiting list. Buyers from major department stores requested appointments. Fashion editors expressed interest in attending. What James had dismissed as a little project was rapidly becoming a legitimate contender in the sustainable luxury space before we'd sold a single piece. The night before our launch event, I stood alone in the now transformed warehouse. The raw industrial space had become an elegant showroom at the front, with design and production areas visible through glass partitions at the back, transparency as both aesthetic and ethical statement. Our collection hung on minimalist displays, each piece representing countless hours of work, each design a reflection of the values Phoenix Rising embodied. My phone buzzed, a text from James, who had taken to sending daily messages despite the restraining order. "Last chance to end this madness. Come home, return the money, and I'll forgive everything." I stared at the message, marveling at his continued belief that he was in control. That forgiveness was his to offer. That I would even consider returning to the prison he called home. I didn't bother replying. Instead, I turned off my phone, took one last look around the space that represented my rebirth, and headed to my apartment to rest before the most important day of my new life. The launch event exceeded every expectation. Fashion editors, buyers, influencers, and sustainability advocates filled the showroom, champagne flowing, excitement palpable. I moved through the crowd, describing our design philosophy, explaining our ethical production methods, accepting congratulations and business cards. Every time the door opened, I tensed slightly, half expecting James to appear despite the restraining order. But he never did. Later, I learned from Rebecca that he was in court that day, fighting unsuccessfully to have the financial orders modified. By evening's end, we had pre-orders from 2 major retailers, features scheduled in 3 fashion magazines, and a waitlist for our online shop launch. When the last guest departed, my team gathered in the center of the showroom, exhausted but exhilarated. "To Phoenix Rising," Madeline said, raising her glass. "And to Eliza, who had the courage to rise from the ashes and bring us all along." As we toasted, I looked around at these people who had believed in my vision, who had worked tirelessly to bring it to life in record time. They saw my worth without question. They valued my ideas, my leadership, my vision. For the first time since discovering James's betrayal, I felt tears threatening. Not tears of hurt or anger, but of profound gratitude for this new life I was creating, for the strength I hadn't known I possessed, for the future stretching before me, uncertain but filled with possibility. 3 months later, Phoenix Rising had established itself as an emerging force in sustainable luxury fashion. Our e-commerce launch sold out in 48 hours. A feature in Vogue highlighted our commitment to ethical production and innovative design. Profits were modest but growing steadily, reinvested immediately into expanding our collection and improving our sustainable practices. The divorce proceedings continued, but with diminishing venom. James's initial rage had given way to grudging recognition that he couldn't bully me back into submission. The financial settlement negotiations were complex and ongoing, but Rebecca's meticulous documentation of his financial control and my legitimate claim to business assets had strengthened my position considerably. I rarely saw James now, our communications filtered through attorneys. When we did encounter each other at court appearances, he avoided meeting my eyes. The confident, controlling man who had dismissed me as worthless seemed diminished somehow. His power over me evaporated. 1 year to the day after I overheard James's devastating assessment of my worth, I received the final divorce decree. The settlement wasn't what James had initially threatened. Far from it. I retained ownership of Phoenix Rising, now valued at significantly more than my initial investment. I received a fair portion of our marital assets, including a lump sum representing my rightful share of the business my father had helped establish. That evening, I sat in my office at Phoenix Rising, no longer a raw warehouse but a thriving business with 20 employees and growing international recognition. On my desk was the latest financial report showing our first $1 million in revenue, ahead of the most optimistic projections. My phone buzzed with a text, not from James this time, but from Rebecca. "Congratulations on your freedom. Officially and finally yours." I smiled, looking around at what I had built from the ashes of my marriage. A successful business, a passionate team, a life that reflected my true worth. James had been wrong about so many things, but especially about me. I wasn't nothing. I wasn't worthless. I was Phoenix Rising, powerful, resilient, and just beginning to soar. 2 years after launching Phoenix Rising, I found myself sitting in the green room of a popular morning talk show, waiting to be interviewed about my inspiring journey from housewife to fashion mogul. The producer had used those exact words when booking me, and though I'd winced slightly at the simplification, I understood the appeal of the narrative. "5 minutes, Ms. Carter," a production assistant called, poking her head through the door. "Thank you," I replied automatically before catching myself. "Actually, it's Ms. Phoenix now." It had been one of my first acts after the divorce was finalized, legally changing my name to match my company. Eliza Phoenix. A clean break from the past. A symbol of my transformation. The young woman nodded, making a note on her tablet. "Of course, Ms. Phoenix. Sorry about that." As she disappeared, I turned back to the mirror, studying my reflection. I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me compared to who I'd been 3 years ago. My hair was shorter now, falling in confident layers around my face, rather than the long, perfect waves James had preferred. My clothing, one of Phoenix Rising's newest designs, of course, projected strength rather than decorative fragility. But the most striking difference was in my eyes. The uncertain, eager-to-please look had vanished, replaced by something steadier, more assured. "You've got this," I whispered to my reflection, a ritual I'd developed before important meetings or appearances. A small reminder that I was no longer the woman who had crumbled upon hearing her husband call her worthless. The interview went smoothly. I'd become practiced at telling a sanitized version of my story, emphasizing the business innovation and ethical mission of Phoenix Rising rather than the painful catalyst for its creation. I spoke about sustainable fashion, about creating luxury pieces that honored both the environment and the workers who made them, about our rapid growth and recent expansion into accessories. I didn't mention James, not directly, but his shadow lingered in the careful phrasing I used when the host inevitably asked about my sudden career change. "Sometimes life hands you a moment of clarity," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. "Mine came when I realized I'd been allowing someone else to define my worth. Phoenix Rising was born from that realization, that we all deserve to define success on our own terms." The audience applauded, drawn in by the empowerment message without needing to know the ugliness that had preceded it. As the segment ended, the host leaned in during the commercial break. "That was fantastic," she said warmly. "And between us, I know there's more to that story than you're saying. My first husband was a piece of work too." I smiled, grateful for her understanding. "Thank you for not pushing for those details." "Please," she waved dismissively. "The real story is what you've built. 2 years in business and already at $8 million in revenue? That's the headline, 8 million. Sometimes the number still startled me. Phoenix Rising had grown beyond my most ambitious projections, riding a wave of consumer interest in sustainable fashion and buoyed by our story of female entrepreneurship. We now employed 47 people, had expanded to a larger facility in the same neighborhood, and were preparing to open our first flagship retail location. All because James had underestimated me so profoundly. As my car navigated through morning traffic toward our headquarters, I scrolled through emails on my phone, order confirmations from our latest wholesale accounts, a meeting request from a major department store interested in a dedicated Phoenix Rising section, a progress report on the retail space renovations, and then a name that still made my stomach tighten. James Carter. Subject line, "Time to talk." I stared at the unopened email, my finger hovering over the delete button. I hadn't had direct contact with James in over a year, since the divorce was finalized. Any necessary communications had gone through our respective attorneys. What could he possibly want now? Curiosity won over caution. I opened the message. "Eliza, I think it's time we had a conversation like adults. The divorce is behind us. We've both moved on. I've been following Phoenix Rising's success from afar, and I have to admit you've proven me wrong. Perhaps we could meet for coffee and discuss a business proposition that might benefit us both. James." I read it twice, looking for the hidden barb, the veiled threat, the manipulative undertone, but it seemed straightforward, almost respectful. The acknowledgement that I'd proven him wrong was as close to an apology as James Carter would ever come. Still, the idea of a business proposition set off warning bells. James never did anything without calculating the advantage for himself. Whatever he wanted, it wasn't about benefiting us both. I forwarded the email to Rebecca, who remained both my attorney and my friend, with a simple question. "Worth hearing him out?" Her response came quickly. "Your call. You're in a position of strength now. If you're curious, meet somewhere public. I can join you if you want backup." Was I curious? Yes, I had to admit I was. And perhaps there was something else. A desire to face James on equal footing, to look him in the eye as a successful businesswoman rather than the shattered wife who had fled with her dignity in tatters. "James," I wrote back, "I'm willing to meet. The cafe at the Art Museum, Thursday at 3 p.m. I'll have a short window between meetings." The location was deliberate, public but quiet, neutral territory with easy exits, and the time limit gave me an escape hatch if needed. His reply came within minutes. "I'll be there." "Thank you, Eliza." The simple courtesy of "thank you" from James felt foreign, almost jarring. In the years we were married, gratitude was not part of his vocabulary, at least not genuine gratitude. Everything had been transactional, every kindness extended with the expectation of return. I put the phone down and gazed out the window at the city passing by. Whatever James wanted, I was not the same woman he had married, and certainly not the same woman he had discarded. I could handle one coffee meeting without losing myself. At least I hoped I could. The cafe at the art museum was one of my favorite spots in the city, airy and light, with soaring ceilings and views of the sculpture garden. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table near the exit with good sightlines to the entrance. Old habits of strategic positioning died hard. I recognized James the moment he walked in. He looked essentially the same: the tailored suit, the confident stride, the carefully maintained hair. Yet something was different. It took me a moment to identify it. He seemed smaller somehow, not physically but in presence. The man who had once dominated rooms by sheer force of personality now just looked like a man, well-dressed and handsome certainly, but ordinary. He spotted me and approached, a hint of hesitation in his step that I'd never seen before. "Eliza," he said, stopping at my table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "James," I acknowledged with a nod. "Please sit." He settled into the chair across from me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I used the silence to study him more carefully. Fine lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. A tightness in his jaw. He looked tired, I realized, and older. "You look well," he said finally. "Success suits you." "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "You wanted to talk about a business proposition?" He smiled slightly at my directness. "Still not one for small talk, I see." "That's new." "Time is valuable," I said. "And as I mentioned, my window is limited." He nodded, reaching for the menu rather than continuing immediately. "Shall we order first?" I recognized the tactic. Establish control of the conversation's pace, create small delays, make the other person wait. Classic James. I decided to allow it, curious to see where he was heading. After the server took our orders, espresso for him, herbal tea for me, he folded his hands on the table and met my eyes directly. "I'll get straight to it," he said. "Carter Financial Strategies has been approached about creating a specialized investment fund focused on sustainable businesses. Given Phoenix Rising's success in that space, having you involved would add significant credibility." I kept my expression neutral even as surprise rippled through me. This was not what I had expected. Involved how exactly? As a featured investment, primarily. We would include Phoenix Rising in the portfolio, promoting your company as an example of the fund's investment philosophy. You'd receive a significant capital infusion, and your brand would get exposure to our high-net-worth client base. I took a slow sip of my tea, considering his words. "And the benefit to you would be? My clients are increasingly interested in sustainable investments, but it's not my area of expertise. Your company has established credibility in that space. It's simply good business." The server delivered James's espresso, providing a momentary pause in the conversation. I used it to gather my thoughts, to look beyond the surface of his proposal. What was he really after? Why Phoenix Rising specifically? I asked when we were alone again. "There are larger, more established, sustainable brands you could approach." He smiled, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the charm that had once captivated me, the smile that made you feel like you were the only person who mattered. "Because of your story, Eliza. From housewife to fashion entrepreneur in 2 years? It's compelling. Aspirational. Exactly what attracts investors to these kinds of funds. My story," I repeated flatly. "You mean the story of how I discovered my husband thought I was worthless and used his money to prove him wrong?" The smile faltered. He hadn't expected me to be so blunt, to reference that moment so directly. I was thinking more along the lines of visionary founder identifies market opportunity and creates innovative solution, he said, his tone carefully measured. "The personal details aren't relevant to the investment thesis." I studied him, trying to determine if this was simply James being James, opportunistic, focused on profit, or if there was a deeper agenda. Revenge, perhaps, or an attempt to regain control in some way. "Let me make sure I understand," I said. "You want to use my company and my personal story to attract investors to your fund. In return, Phoenix Rising gets an investment and exposure to your client network." "Exactly." He nodded, looking relieved that I was engaging with the substance of his proposal. "It's a win-win. And who would control the narrative about my company and my journey? Who decides what version of my story gets told to your clients?" His hesitation told me everything. "We would work together on the messaging, of course. My team would draft something for your approval." With all the unpleasant details sanitized away, I finished for him. "Nothing about how you used my father's connections to build your business. Nothing about how you controlled our finances. Nothing about your affair with Melanie." At the mention of her name, something flickered across his face. Discomfort, perhaps even pain. Interesting. What happened between us personally isn't relevant to a business prospectus, he said stiffly. It's relevant to me, James. It's the foundation of Phoenix Rising. I built this company because you thought I couldn't. Because you thought I was nothing without you. He flinched slightly at the echo of his own words. People say things they don't mean in private conversations, Eliza. I was under enormous pressure at the time. The Robinson account was— Stop, I interrupted, holding up a hand. I didn't come here to rehash the past or listen to excuses. If you have a formal proposal, you can send it to my office. My team will review it like any other potential investment opportunity. He looked genuinely surprised. You're actually considering it? I consider all legitimate business opportunities, I replied coolly. Phoenix Rising is approaching a growth phase where additional capital would be useful. But any partnership would need to make sense on our terms. James nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in his eyes. Of course. I'll have my team prepare a detailed proposal. We finished our drinks in relative silence, the initial tension giving way to an odd sort of detached civility. As we prepared to leave, James hesitated, then spoke again. For what it's worth, Eliza, I was wrong about you. What you've built with Phoenix Rising is impressive. Truly. I studied him, searching for the manipulation behind the compliment, the hidden agenda in the acknowledgement. But all I saw was a man confronting the consequences of his miscalculation, a man who had underestimated someone at great cost to himself. Thank you, I said finally. But I didn't build it to impress you, James. I built it for me. As I walked away, I felt his eyes following me. 3 years ago, his attention would have filled me with anxiety. Was I walking correctly? Was my outfit appropriate? Would he approve of how I'd handled the conversation? Now I felt nothing but a calm certainty that whatever game he was playing, I was no longer a pawn in it. He wants what? Madeline looked incredulous, perched on the edge of my desk later that afternoon as I recounted the meeting. To include Phoenix Rising in a sustainable investment fund, I repeated, still processing it myself. With a significant capital investment in exchange. And you're actually considering it? She shook her head in disbelief. After everything he did to you? I leaned back in my chair, considering how to explain my thinking. Madeline had been with me from the beginning, one of the first people I'd hired, now my chief operating officer and closest confidant in the business. She knew the unvarnished truth about Phoenix Rising's origins. I'm considering evaluating the proposal, I clarified. If the terms make business sense and give us complete control over how our story is presented, it could accelerate our expansion plans. And you trust him to honor those terms? The man who built his entire relationship with you on lies? It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself since walking away from the cafe. I don't need to trust him, I said finally. Any agreement would be thoroughly vetted by our attorneys. And James is nothing if not self-interested. If associating with Phoenix Rising benefits him financially, he'll honor the terms. Madeline studied me, her expression softening slightly. This isn't just about business for you, though, is it? I sighed, acknowledging the truth in her observation. No, it's not. So what is it about? I stood and moved to the window, looking out at the city as I gathered my thoughts. My office overlooked the vibrant design district, a daily reminder of how far I'd come. When I left James, I took his money and his pride. I proved him wrong about my abilities. But there's still a part of me that wants more than that. I turned back to face Madeline. I want him to have to acknowledge publicly that I succeeded. I want his wealthy clients, many of whom were our social circle, to see him partnering with me as an equal, maybe even as his superior. Revenge, Madeline said simply. Justice, I corrected. Recognition, validation. Call it what you will. She nodded slowly. Just be careful that pursuit doesn't pull you back into his orbit. You've worked too hard to free yourself. Her concern touched me. Over the past 2 years, my team had become more than employees. They were my support system, the family I'd chosen for myself. Their loyalty still surprised me sometimes, so accustomed had I been to James's conditional affections. I appreciate your concern, I said sincerely. But I'm not the woman he married anymore. I can handle James Carter. After Madeline left, I sat alone in my office, contemplating the strange turn of events. What was James really after? The business explanation made sense on the surface. Sustainable investing was indeed a growing field, and Phoenix Rising's story would be attractive to potential investors. But with James, there was always a hidden agenda, an angle I wasn't seeing. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Got time to discuss the James situation? Just finished reviewing some interesting documents. 20 minutes later, she was seated across from me, tablet in hand, her expression suggesting she'd discovered something significant. "So," she began without preamble, "I did some digging after you forwarded his email. Carter Financial Strategies has indeed been preparing a sustainable investment fund. That part is legitimate. What James didn't mention is that they're doing it out of necessity rather than innovation." She handed me her tablet, open to a financial news article from the previous month. Carter Financial Strategies faces client exodus amid ethical investment demands. I skimmed the article quickly. According to anonymous sources, James's firm had lost several major clients in the past year, primarily to competitors offering robust ESG environmental, social, and governance investment options. The Sustainable Fund was a belated attempt to stem the losses. "So he needs us more than he's letting on," I mused, handing the tablet back. "Much more," Rebecca confirmed. "But there's something else." She swiped to a different document. "I obtained their draft fund prospectus through a contact. Look at the projected holdings." I examined the list, noting that Phoenix Rising was prominently featured, positioned as the fund's cornerstone investment with a proposed 15% allocation. But it was another name further down that caught my attention. "MK Designs," I read aloud. "That's Melanie, isn't it?" Rebecca nodded. "Melanie Klein. Apparently she left Carter Financial about a year ago to start her own sustainable jewelry brand. Small operation, minimally profitable so far. But James is proposing a 7% allocation to her company in the same fund." I sat back, pieces falling into place. "He's trying to use the fund to support her business too." "Appears that way," Rebecca agreed. "Though interestingly, your company and hers are listed as separate, unaffiliated investments. There's no indication in the materials that either of you has any connection to James personally." "That's strange," I said slowly. "If they're still together, why hide the connection?" "That's the most interesting part," Rebecca said, leaning forward. "According to my sources, they're not together anymore. She left him around the same time she left the company. Apparently things ended. Dramatically." I absorbed this information, memories of James's reaction when I'd mentioned Melanie's name at the cafe suddenly making more sense. The flicker of pain in his eyes, the stiffness in his posture. He's trying to win her back, I realized aloud. "This fund, it's not just about business. It's personal for him." Rebecca nodded. "That's my read as well. The fund benefits three parties: his firm, by stemming client losses, your company, with capital for expansion, and Melanie's struggling jewelry business, which frankly doesn't merit the investment allocation on its own merits." I stood and paced the length of my office, processing this revelation. James, the man who had once called me worthless, was now effectively asking for my help in his attempt to win back the woman he'd cheated with. The irony was almost too perfect. "So what do you think?" Rebecca asked after giving me a moment. "Does this change your perspective on his proposal?" I stopped pacing and turned to face her, a slow smile spreading across my face. "It changes everything. And it gives me leverage I didn't have before." "You're still considering working with him?" She looked surprised. "I'm considering a counter-proposal," I clarified. "One where Phoenix Rising isn't just a passive investment in his fund, but an active partner. One where I have significant control over the fund's direction and messaging." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "That's not typically how these arrangements work." "Nothing about this situation is typical," I pointed out. "James needs me, my company's profile, my story, my credibility in the sustainable space. He needs me to make this fund successful, which he in turn needs to impress Melanie." "And you're willing to help him do that?" Rebecca looked skeptical. "Help the man who betrayed you win back the woman he betrayed you with?" When she put it that way, it did sound absurd. But there was something appealing about the potential power dynamic, about James needing my approval, my cooperation, my success to achieve his goals. "I'm willing to explore an arrangement that significantly benefits Phoenix Rising, while giving James just enough of what he wants to keep him motivated," I said carefully. "But on my terms, not his." Rebecca studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I see where you're going with this. Use his desperation to negotiate favorable terms for Phoenix Rising." "Exactly. And perhaps to extract a few more personal concessions as well." "Such as?" I sat down again, ideas forming rapidly. "Public acknowledgement of my contribution to his early success through my father's connections. Return of certain family heirlooms he retained in the divorce. And a formal board position with the fund, one that gives me influence over all investment decisions. Including whether Melanie's company receives funding," Rebecca noted, catching on quickly. Including that, I confirmed. If James wants my help rebuilding his business and his love life, he'll need to acknowledge my worth in ways he never did during our marriage. Rebecca's expression was a mixture of admiration and concern. It's a bold strategy, but be careful, Eliza. Entangling yourself with James again, even from a position of power, comes with risks. I'm aware, I assured her, but there's something poetic about it, don't you think? Using the leverage he inadvertently gave me to negotiate from strength, turning his manipulation tactics back on him. Poetic justice, Rebecca agreed with a slight smile. Just remember what you once told me, that you built Phoenix Rising for yourself, not to prove anything to James. Her words hit home, a necessary reminder of how far I'd come. She was right to caution me. Revenge, even the sophisticated business suit version I was contemplating, was a dangerous motivation. It could pull me back into old patterns, old reflexes. You're right, I acknowledged. This has to make sense for Phoenix Rising first. My personal satisfaction is secondary. Good, she said, standing to leave. Draft your counterproposal with that principle in mind. I'll review it from the legal perspective. After she left, I remained at my desk, contemplating the strange opportunity before me. 3 years ago, I'd been the dependent wife, devastated by James's betrayal, desperately seeking a way to prove my worth. Now I was in a position to negotiate with him as an equal, perhaps even as his superior. The woman he had deemed worthless now held the key to what he wanted most. It was, as Rebecca had said, poetic justice, but I needed to be careful that in pursuing it, I didn't lose sight of who I had become without him. The formal proposal from Carter Financial Strategies arrived the next day, a glossy presentation outlining the structure of the Sustainable Investment Fund, the benefits to Phoenix Rising, and the proposed terms. As Rebecca had discovered, my company was positioned as the cornerstone investment, with a significant capital infusion offered in exchange for using our brand and story in their marketing materials. I reviewed it carefully with my executive team and our financial advisors. Stripped of the personal complications, the business proposition had merit. The capital would accelerate our expansion plans, potentially shaving a year off our timeline for opening international locations. The exposure to James's wealthy client base could bring in new customers and potential partners. But the terms gave his firm too much control over our narrative and provided insufficient governance input for Phoenix Rising, given our central role in the fund's identity. With Rebecca's help, I drafted a detailed counterproposal, then scheduled a meeting with James at our headquarters. If we were to forge any kind of business relationship, he needed to see firsthand what I had built, to step into my world, rather than expecting me to accommodate his. He arrived precisely on time, wearing an expression of studied neutrality as our receptionist led him through the bright, open workspace toward my office. I watched through the glass walls as he took in the bustling activity, designers sketching at drafting tables, sample makers working with sustainable fabrics, marketing team members gathered around a campaign board. It was a vibrant, productive environment, worlds away from the sterile formality of Carter Financial Strategies. "Impressive operation," he said as he entered my office, echoing his comment from the cafe but with more genuine appreciation this time. "Thank you," I replied, gesturing for him to take a seat across from my desk. I remained standing for a moment longer, aware of the subtle power dynamic. In our marriage, he had always been the one standing while I sat, the one in motion, in control, looking down rather than up. "I've reviewed your proposal," I continued, finally settling into my chair. "There are elements that could work for Phoenix Rising, but significant adjustments would be necessary." He nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "I assumed you'd have changes. What are your main concerns?" I slid a tablet across the desk to him, open to our counterproposal. "I've outlined everything there, but the key points are governance structure, narrative control, and investment allocation." He began scanning the document, his expression neutral until he reached the section on governance. His eyebrows rose slightly. "You want a position on the fund's investment committee? With veto power over any investment decisions?" "Phoenix Rising would be the flagship investment and the primary marketing draw," I pointed out. "It's reasonable that we have a voice in determining which other companies share that platform with us." He looked up from the tablet, studying me with newfound wariness. "This is about Melanie's company, isn't it?" I met his gaze steadily. "It's about ensuring all investments in the fund align with our values and meet our standards for genuine sustainability. MK Designs would be evaluated on those merits, like any other potential investment." Along with the additional requirements outlined here, he said, scrolling further through the document. Public acknowledgement of my early funding sources. Return of your grandmother's jewelry collection. A significant increase in the capital allocation to Phoenix Rising. He set the tablet down. These terms go well beyond standard business arrangements, Eliza. These circumstances go well beyond standard business relationships, James. I leaned forward slightly. You're not approaching me solely as a potential investment. You're asking to use my personal story, my journey from your wife to successful entrepreneur, to sell your fund to clients. That has a premium attached. A flicker of something, acknowledgement perhaps, crossed his face. You know, that Melanie left you? Yes. That this fund is partly an attempt to win her back by supporting her jewelry business? I suspected as much. He didn't deny it, which surprised me. The James I had been married to would have deflected, would have maintained the fiction of pure business motivation regardless of evidence to the contrary. Her company shows promise, he said instead, but it needs capital to scale. The sustainability angle aligns with the fund's thesis. And the fact that you're still in love with her is merely coincidental, I noted dryly. His jaw tightened. My personal motivations are irrelevant to the business proposition. They're entirely relevant when you're asking for my help, James. You forget. I know how you operate. Nothing is ever simply business with you. There's always a personal angle and emotional leverage point. He was silent for a moment, then sighed, some of the careful facade slipping. You're right. Of course you're right. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of genuine agitation I'd seen only a handful of times during our marriage. Yes, I want to help Melanie. Yes, I hope that showing I believe in her vision might repair some of the damage between us. The damage caused when she discovered you were just using her too? I couldn't resist asking. When she found out she was just another asset in your portfolio? His expression darkened. That's not what happened. No? What did happen, James? Why did your perfect affair partner leave you? She seemed so ideal, brilliant, ambitious. Everything I supposedly wasn't. I was treading into dangerous territory, allowing old wounds to direct the conversation away from business. But some perverse curiosity had taken hold, a desire to understand what had ultimately broken them. James was quiet for a long moment, seemingly debating how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. She found some of our divorce proceedings paperwork. The transcripts where my attorney argued that your business success was merely luck and opportunism. Where I minimized your contributions and intelligence. He met my eyes briefly before looking away. She said if that was how I spoke about my wife of 8 years, she could only imagine how I'd eventually speak about her. The revelation hit me with unexpected force. Melanie, the woman I'd hated sight unseen, had actually defended me, had recognized the pattern that would eventually ensnare her too. She was right, I said quietly. Yes, James admitted. She was. We sat in silence for a moment, the ghost of our shared past hovering between us. Then James seemed to gather himself, gesturing to the tablet. Some of these terms I can work with. The governance role, the increased capital allocation, those are negotiable. The personal items like your grandmother's jewelry, I can return those regardless of whether we reach an agreement. He paused. But the public acknowledgement of your father's role in my early success, that's complicated. It's non-negotiable, I said firmly. If you want to use my story to sell your fund, it will be the complete story, including how you leveraged my family connections to build your business, then tried to minimize my contribution in the divorce. He frowned. That narrative could damage client confidence in my leadership. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But it's the truth. And from what I understand, your clients are already questioning your leadership, given your late entry into sustainable investing. His expression confirmed my assessment. James was in a weaker position than he wanted me to know, caught between changing market demands and personal desperation to win back Melanie. I need time to consider your counterproposal, he said finally, picking up the tablet. There are elements that could work, but others that would require significant internal discussion. Of course, I said smoothly, standing to indicate our meeting was concluding. Take whatever time you need. Phoenix Rising isn't desperate for capital. We're considering multiple investment options. It was partly a bluff. While we did have other potential investors, none offered the combination of capital and market access that James's fund could provide. But he didn't need to know that. James stood as well, extending his hand in a formal gesture that would have been unthinkable during our marriage, when any physical contact between us had been on his terms, initiated at his discretion. "Regardless of whether we reach an agreement," he said as we shook hands, "I meant what I said before. What you've built here is impressive, Eliza. You've proven me wrong in the most emphatic way possible." There was a time when those words would have meant everything to me, when his approval was the currency I valued above all else. Now they were merely acknowledgement of an objective reality, appreciated but not necessary for my sense of worth. "Thank you," I said simply. "I'll await your response to our terms." As he left, escorted by our receptionist through the busy workspace, I watched from my office doorway. 3 years ago, his presence had dominated every room he entered. Now, he seemed diminished against the backdrop of what I had created, just one more business contact passing through the vibrant world of Phoenix Rising. I returned to my desk, a strange mix of emotions swirling beneath my professional composure: satisfaction at negotiating from strength, curiosity about his relationship with Melanie, and something unexpected, a faint but unmistakable sense of pity for the man who had once seemed all-powerful in my world. James Carter was fighting to regain what he had lost: his professional standing, his personal relationship, perhaps even his sense of identity, while I, the woman he had dismissed as worthless, was flourishing in a life entirely of my own making. It was, perhaps, the most complete revenge I could have imagined. 3 days passed without word from James. I focused on Phoenix Rising's immediate priorities: the upcoming fall collection launch, our retail store opening, negotiations with international distributors. The potential fund partnership remained in the background, important but not urgent. Madeline found me in the design studio late one evening, reviewing fabric samples for the winter line. Most of the team had gone home, but I often stayed late, finding clarity in the quiet hours after the day's bustle had faded. "You're working too hard again," she observed, pulling up a stool beside me at the large work table. I smiled, setting aside a swatch of organic wool. "Says the woman who's also still here at 8 p.m. "Fair point." She glanced at the fabric samples spread across the table. "The camel cashmere from the new supplier is beautiful. And completely traceable," I added. "They provided full documentation on herd management practices, worker conditions, everything." Madeline nodded approvingly, then shifted topics. "Any word from your ex-husband?" "Not yet." I leaned back, stretching tight shoulders. "I'm not surprised. My counterproposal asks for concessions his ego will find difficult to accept. Do you think he'll agree?" I considered the question seriously. "I think he's desperate enough to come close. He needs Phoenix Rising more than we need his fund." Madeline studied me for a moment. "You know, when you first told me about his proposal, I thought you were crazy to even consider it. But watching you handle this, turning his overture into an opportunity to negotiate from strength, it's been impressive." "Thank you," I said, touched by her observation. "I've learned a few things about leverage these past few years. From the master himself, apparently," she noted with a wry smile. "Though I'm still not sure entangling the company with James in any capacity is wise. Business partnerships require trust, and there's too much history there." It was a valid concern, one I'd been wrestling with myself. Could I truly enter a business relationship with the man who had so thoroughly betrayed my trust? Who had dismantled my self-worth piece by piece over 8 years? "I'm not making decisions based on emotions, positive or negative," I assured her. "If we proceed, it will be with extensive legal protections and clear boundaries, and only if the terms strongly favor Phoenix Rising. And the personal satisfaction of having James need your approval to help his girlfriend's company? That's just a bonus?" Her tone was gently teasing, but the question cut to the heart of my conflicted motivations. "Former girlfriend?" I corrected automatically, then sighed, acknowledging the point. "Yes, there's an element of personal satisfaction. I'm human, Madeline. But it's not driving the decision." She nodded, accepting my answer. "Well, whatever you decide, the team is behind you. We just want what's best for you and for Phoenix Rising." After she left, I remained at the work table, absent-mindedly arranging and rearranging fabric swatches. Madeline's concern had touched on something I'd been avoiding confronting directly: the question of whether any business with James, no matter how advantageous the terms, would inevitably pull me back into unhealthy patterns. For all my confidence in negotiating with him as an equal, there was still a part of me that reacted to his presence in old ways. A heightened awareness, a careful monitoring of his expressions and reactions, reflexes developed over years of walking on eggshells. My phone buzzed with an email notification interrupting my thoughts. James. Eliza. After careful consideration, I believe we can reach an agreement that addresses your key concerns while maintaining the integrity of the fund structure. I've attached a revised proposal incorporating many elements of your counterproposal with some modifications. Additionally, I've arranged for the return of your grandmother's jewelry collection regardless of our business discussions. It should never have been included in the contested assets during our divorce. The items will be delivered to your office tomorrow morning. If the revised terms are acceptable in principle, perhaps we could meet to finalize details. James. I opened the attached document, expecting significant pushback on my most demanding terms. Instead, I found surprising concessions. He had agreed to my role on the investment committee, though with modified veto powers limited to sustainability criteria rather than blanket authority. He had accepted the increased capital allocation to Phoenix Rising and granted us complete control over how our story was presented in fund materials. Most surprisingly, he had included a section acknowledging the foundational contributions of the Phoenix family connections in establishing Carter Financial Strategies, a public admission I hadn't actually expected him to make. The one area where he held firm was on Melanie's company. MK Designs remained in the proposed investment portfolio, with language specifying that while it would be subject to the same sustainability standards as other investments, it could not be excluded based solely on personal or historical considerations. It was a more reasonable response than I had anticipated, one that suggested James had either swallowed his considerable pride or was even more desperate than I'd realized. I forwarded the proposal to Rebecca with a brief note. Thoughts? He's conceded more than expected. Her response came the next morning, after she'd had time to review the document thoroughly. The terms are surprisingly favorable. Legal protections are solid. If this is genuinely about business advantage for Phoenix Rising, it's worth serious consideration. I spent the day considering the revised proposal, discussing specifics with my executive team, weighing potential benefits against the emotional complications. By evening, I had made my decision. James. The revised proposal addresses most of my concerns. I believe we can move forward on these terms, with some minor adjustments to the governance structure that my attorney will outline. I'm available to meet Thursday afternoon at Phoenix Rising to discuss final details. Regarding my grandmother's jewelry, thank you. Those pieces have significant sentimental value beyond their monetary worth. Eliza. His response was immediate. Thursday works. I look forward to finalizing our partnership. Partnership? The word gave me pause. 3 years ago, I had fled a marriage that had proven to be anything but a partnership. Now I was voluntarily entering a business relationship with the same man, albeit from a position of power rather than dependency. Was I making a mistake? Or was this the final step in reclaiming my narrative, proving that I could engage with James on my terms without losing myself in the process? Thursday would tell. The jewelry arrived the next morning as promised, a velvet box containing the delicate pieces my grandmother had passed down through generations of women in our family, the Art Deco diamond bracelet she had worn on her wedding day, the emerald earrings that had been a 20th anniversary gift from my grandfather, the pearl choker that featured in every formal portrait of her from the 1950s onward. I had resigned myself to never seeing these pieces again after the divorce, when James had insisted they were jointly acquired assets despite their obvious provenance. His willingness to return them now, without conditions, felt like a small but meaningful acknowledgement of past wrongs. I was still examining the contents of the box when Rebecca arrived for our pre-meeting strategy session. "Family heirlooms?" she asked, recognizing the significance of what I was holding. "Yes," I confirmed, carefully closing the box. "James returned them this morning. They should never have been contested in the divorce. A peace offering," she noted, "or an attempt to soften you up before negotiations. Either way, I'm glad to have them back." I moved the box to a secure drawer, then turned to business. "What minor adjustments are you proposing to the governance structure?" For the next hour, we refined our position on the few remaining points of contention, primarily related to the specific criteria by which investments would be evaluated and the extent of Phoenix Rising's input on fund marketing materials. By the time James arrived, we had a clear strategy for finalizing terms that would give us the protections and influence I deemed necessary. The meeting proceeded with surprising smoothness. James arrived with his chief legal counsel, a woman I hadn't met before. Significantly, not the same attorney who had represented him in our divorce. Whether that was a practical decision or a symbolic one, the absence of that particular ghost from our shared past helped maintain a professional atmosphere. We worked through the remaining points methodically, finding compromise where necessary, holding firm where essential. Throughout the discussion, I observed James carefully, not with the hypervigilance of my married years, but with the clinical assessment of a business negotiator evaluating her counterpart. He was deferential in a way I had never seen him be during our marriage, genuinely considering my concerns rather than dismissing them. When he disagreed, he did so respectfully, offering substantive counterarguments rather than leveraging his authority. It was as if I were dealing with an entirely different person, or perhaps more accurately, seeing aspects of James that had never been directed toward me when I was his wife. By late afternoon, we had reached agreement on all material terms. Our respective legal teams would draft the final documents, but the partnership was effectively established. Phoenix Rising would receive a $10 million capital investment in exchange for becoming the cornerstone of Carter Financial's new Sustainable Investment Fund. I would join the fund's investment committee with significant input on portfolio decisions, and our shared history would be acknowledged honestly in the fund's marketing materials. As the meeting concluded and the attorneys gathered their documents, James asked if we could speak privately for a moment. Rebecca gave me a questioning look, and I nodded my assurance that I was comfortable with the request. When the others had left my office, James remained seated across from me, an unusual hesitancy in his posture. "Thank you," he said finally, "for considering this partnership despite our history, for negotiating in good faith despite having every reason not to. It's a sound business decision," I replied. "Phoenix Rising benefits substantially from these terms." "Yes," he acknowledged, "but we both know there were easier paths you could have taken, other investment sources without the personal complications." I didn't deny it. We had moved beyond the point where pretense served either of us. "The jewelry," he continued when I didn't immediately respond. "I hope returning it conveyed what I intended." "And what was that?" I asked. He met my eyes directly. "Acknowledgement that I handled our divorce poorly, that I tried to hurt you in ways that went beyond the dissolution of our marriage." It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever heard from James Carter, a man whose self-image had never before allowed him to acknowledge fault or regret. "Thank you," I said simply. "Those pieces are important to me." He nodded, then shifted slightly, clearly building toward something else. "There's one other matter I wanted to address. About Melanie." I kept my expression neutral, though my interest sharpened. "Yes? You have every right to object to her company's inclusion in the fund. Your terms giving you veto power over investments that don't meet sustainability criteria, they're fair. But I want to be transparent about my intentions. To win her back by supporting her business," I supplied. He shook his head slightly. "It's not that simple. When Melanie left, she made it very clear there was no possibility of reconciliation. This isn't about winning her back, it's about making amends. Her business has genuine potential, but it's struggling for capital precisely because of her association with me. Many doors that should be open to her based on her talent are closed because of how things ended between us." It wasn't what I had expected him to say. The James I knew didn't make amends. He moved on, rewrote history, cast himself as the wronged party. "What happened between you?" I found myself asking, beyond her finding the divorce documents. He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "She saw in me what I couldn't see in myself. The pattern of using people, of calculating every relationship in terms of its value to me." His eyes met mine briefly. "What I did to you, Eliza. She recognized it for what it was, and she refused to become the next iteration of that pattern." The admission hung between us, not just acknowledgement of how he had treated me, but recognition of the fundamental flaw in how he approached relationships. "That must have been difficult to hear," I said finally. A flash of surprise crossed his face at my relatively sympathetic response. "It was illuminating. Painful but necessary." He paused. "It's why this fund matters beyond the business implications. It's part of a larger process of trying to address the damage I've caused." I studied him, trying to determine if this was another performance, James playing the role of reformed narcissist to achieve his immediate goals. But there was a quality to his demeanor I had never seen before, a lack of the absolute certainty that had always characterized him, a tentative quality to his assertions. "People don't change fundamentally, James," I said carefully. "Not at our age. Not after a lifetime of patterns." "No," he agreed. "But they can become aware of their patterns. They can make different choices, even when the underlying instincts remain the same." It was a more nuanced view than I would have expected from him, an acknowledgement of his limitations rather than a promise of complete transformation. "I hope that's true," I said. "For your sake, and for anyone who becomes involved with you in the future." He nodded, accepting this measured response rather than pushing for more explicit forgiveness or understanding. Then he stood, gathering his briefcase. "Thank you again for your willingness to move forward with the partnership. I believe it will benefit both our companies significantly." "I believe so too," I replied, rising as well. "Otherwise, I wouldn't have agreed to it." As I escorted him to the door of my office, he paused for a moment, looking out at the busy workspace beyond the glass walls, at the thriving business I had built from the ashes of our marriage. "For what it's worth, Eliza," he said quietly, "you've proven to be anything but worthless. You may be the most valuable person I've ever known, and my greatest mistake was failing to recognize that when it mattered." Before I could respond, he nodded a brief goodbye and walked away, moving through the Phoenix Rising headquarters with the careful posture of someone navigating unfamiliar territory, someone acutely aware they were a visitor in a world that had been created without them. I watched until he disappeared from view, a strange mixture of emotions washing through me. Vindication, certainly. His words had acknowledged everything I had sought to prove. But also something unexpected. A sense of genuine closure, as if a door that had been left ajar for 3 years had finally clicked shut. The fund launched 6 months later, after extensive preparation and strategic positioning. The formal announcement generated significant media attention, particularly given the unusual partnership between former spouses, a detail we had decided to acknowledge openly rather than attempt to obscure. Phoenix Rising's Eliza Phoenix partners with ex-husband's investment firm to launch sustainable fund. Read the headline in the Wall Street Journal. The accompanying article told a carefully crafted version of our story, one that acknowledged our past while focusing primarily on the business rationale for the current partnership. James had honored his commitment to publicly recognize my family's contribution to his early success. The press materials included his statement, "Eliza's father was instrumental in providing the connections that launched Carter Financial Strategies. This partnership represents a full-circle moment, as we now support Phoenix Rising's continued growth while building a platform for other sustainable businesses." The fund's initial portfolio included 12 companies, each vetted against rigorous environmental and social governance criteria. Phoenix Rising was the largest investment, followed by 3 established sustainable brands, and then a selection of promising startups, including MK Designs. I had met Melanie during the due diligence process, a meeting I had both dreaded and been intensely curious about. She had proven to be nothing like the villain I had constructed in my imagination during the dark days after discovering James's betrayal. Instead, she was thoughtful, talented, and genuinely committed to ethical jewelry production. Her designs incorporated reclaimed metals and responsibly sourced gemstones, with a portion of proceeds supporting mining communities. "This is awkward," she had said when we first sat down, addressing the elephant in the room with refreshing directness. "But I want you to know I had no idea James was married when our relationship began. He told me he was divorced. It was a pattern I recognized all too well, James restructuring reality to suit his immediate needs. I believe you," I had told her, "and I'm evaluating your company on its merits, not our complicated connection." By the end of that meeting, I had developed a grudging respect for the woman who had seen through James's facade more quickly than I ever had, who had walked away rather than allowing herself to be molded into what he needed. MK Designs met our sustainability criteria legitimately, and I did not exercise my veto power. The launch event for the fund was held at a prestigious art gallery known for its support of environmental causes. I arrived early to review the setup and ensure Phoenix Rising was properly represented in the displays and materials. James was already there, inspecting the presentation boards with his characteristic attention to detail. "Everything looks good," I said as I approached, surveying the space. "The balance between the various portfolio companies is appropriate." He turned, nodding in greeting. "I thought so too." Your team did an excellent job with the Phoenix Rising materials. They're very protective of our brand, I noted. They wanted to make sure we were presented accurately. As they should be, he agreed. Then, after a slight hesitation, how does it feel, seeing this come together? I considered the question seriously. How did it feel to stand beside the man who had once dismissed me as worthless, now as his business partner rather than his subordinate wife? To have my company featured prominently in materials bearing his firm's name? To know that investors would be entrusting millions based partly on my business acumen? Validating, I said finally, but also strangely peaceful, like completing a circle that needed closing. He nodded slowly, seeming to understand. I feel something similar, though in my case it's more about making amends than finding validation. Before we could continue the conversation, the event staff approached with questions about the evening's schedule, and we separated to attend to our respective responsibilities. Throughout the launch party, we maintained a cordial, professional dynamic, neither avoiding each other nor giving observers any reason to speculate about lingering tensions. Melanie arrived midway through the evening, elegant in a simple black dress adorned with a striking pendant of her own design. I watched from across the room as she and James exchanged brief greetings, formal, respectful, but noticeably distant. Whatever his hopes for reconciliation had been, it was clear from their interaction that their relationship remained firmly in the past. Later, as I was speaking with a group of potential investors, I noticed Melanie approaching, apparently having extricated herself from another conversation. "Your collection is beautiful," she said when she reached me, gesturing toward the Phoenix Rising display. "The commitment to transparency and sourcing is particularly impressive." "Thank you," I replied. "Your jewelry designs caught my attention as well. The use of reclaimed metals is innovative." A slightly awkward pause followed. Two women connected by a complicated past, trying to navigate a professional present. "I hope this isn't inappropriate," Melanie said finally, lowering her voice slightly, "but I wanted to thank you." "For what?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "For not excluding my company from the fund. You had every reason to, given our connection." She glanced briefly in James's direction, then back to me. "It would have been understandable if you had exercised your veto power. Your company met our criteria," I said simply. "Personal history doesn't factor into sound investment decisions." She smiled slightly. "A more mature approach than many would take. Including James, I suspect, if the situations were reversed." "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "though he may be learning to separate personal feelings from business judgments." "Slowly, very slowly," she agreed with a wry expression. Then more seriously, "What you've built with Phoenix Rising, it's extraordinary. Especially considering where you started from." The comment caught me off guard. "You know about that?" She nodded. "Some. Enough to recognize how remarkable your journey has been. From housewife to fashion mogul in 3 years, building something meaningful and ethical in an industry known for neither." She paused. "It's inspiring, actually." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by a photographer requesting a picture of the women entrepreneurs featured in the fund. As we posed side by side, I reflected on the strange turns life could take. How the woman I had once viewed as the embodiment of my husband's betrayal was now standing beside me as a professional peer, expressing admiration for my accomplishments. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of networking, interviews, and strategic conversations. By all measures, the fund launch was a success. Commitments exceeded projections, media coverage was extensive and positive, and the narrative of sustainable investing as the future of finance was firmly established. As the event wound down, I found myself alone for a moment near the Phoenix Rising display, studying the images and text that represented my company to this new audience of investors. The journey from that rainy afternoon when I'd overheard James calling me worthless to this moment seemed simultaneously impossibly long and surprisingly brief. "Penny for your thoughts," came Rebecca's voice as she joined me, champagne glass in hand. "Just reflecting on how far we've come," I said. 3 years ago, I was falling apart in our bedroom after discovering James's betrayal. Now I'm his business partner, running a company he never thought I could build." Rebecca smiled. "Life has a way of offering the most unexpected opportunities for justice." "It does," I agreed. "Though I'm not sure I'd call this justice exactly. It's more like verification. Proof that I always had value even when he couldn't see it. And now everyone sees it," she noted, gesturing to the room full of influential people who had come specifically because of Phoenix Rising's involvement in the fund. Including James? Yes, I acknowledged. Though strangely, that matters less to me now than it once would have. That's how you know you've truly moved on, Rebecca said softly. When their opinion loses its power. I nodded, recognizing the truth in her observation. James's acknowledgement of my worth, both implicit in our partnership and explicit in his recent words, no longer determined how I valued myself. It was merely external confirmation of what I already knew. As the last guest departed and the event staff began dismantling displays, James approached from across the room. He looked tired but satisfied, the launch having exceeded even his optimistic projections. "Congratulations," he said, addressing both Rebecca and me. "This partnership is off to a strong start." "Indeed," Rebecca agreed. "The response has been extremely positive. Several investors specifically mentioned Phoenix Rising as their primary interest in the fund," he added, looking at me. "Your company's story resonates strongly. People connect with authenticity," I said, "which is why it was important to present our narrative honestly, complicated history and all." He nodded, understanding my reference to his past tendency to sanitize or manipulate facts to suit his preferred narrative. "Transparency has proven to be a better strategy than I expected," he admitted, "both personally and professionally." Rebecca excused herself tactfully, leaving James and me alone in the nearly empty gallery. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of our shared history and transformed present hanging in the air between us. "I should thank you," he said finally, "for giving this partnership a chance despite everything, for seeing the business opportunity clearly enough to set aside justified personal antipathy." "It was the right decision for Phoenix Rising," I replied, "and perhaps a fitting conclusion to our story." He considered this, then nodded slowly. "A better conclusion than we might have expected 3 years ago." "Much better," I agreed, though I doubt either of us could have imagined this outcome then. "No," he said with a brief, rueful smile. "I certainly couldn't have predicted that the wife I so severely underestimated would become one of my most valuable business partners." The irony hung between us, acknowledged but no longer bitter, simply a truth we both recognized. "Good night, James," I said, gathering my things to leave. "I'll see you at the investment committee meeting next week." "Good night, Eliza," he replied. As I turned to go, he added quietly, "For what it's worth, I am sorry. For all of it." I paused, absorbing the words I had once desperately wanted to hear, the acknowledgement of harm done, the admission of regret. They no longer held the power to heal wounds that had already closed on their own, but they completed something nonetheless. "I know," I said, meeting his eyes one last time. "And that's enough." Walking out of the gallery into the cool evening air, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because James had finally acknowledged his wrongs, or because our business partnership represented some perfect form of revenge, but because I had come full circle, from a woman defined by his estimation of my worth, to a woman who had proven her value to herself and to the world. Phoenix Rising had begun as my response to betrayal, as my desperate attempt to prove James wrong. But somewhere along the way, it had become something far more important, the authentic expression of my vision, my values, my capabilities. The worthless wife had risen from the ashes, transforming pain into purpose, betrayal into opportunity, endings into beginnings. And that, in the end, was the sweetest revenge of all.